So good afternoon. When you hear the words insider threat, what are the first things that come to mind? Is the Trojan horse, the original, not the malware type? Matahari? Spy Granny, the more recent one? Most likely not. Most probably you would think about cases that happened at Google, at Tesla, at Apple, Chinese or Russian imposters pretending to be professors in various European universities. But problem of insider threat is not a recent one. It has existed for centuries, actually since the beginning of the mankind. The means have changed. They became much more sophisticated, and hence the problem became much bigger. That keeps the CEOs often awake at night. And that's why today, Lucile and myself are very excited to talk to you about our knowledge and share it with you.
Yes. Thank you, Diana. So before we start, we'll tell you just a little bit more about ourselves. I'll have a start. I'm Lucile Renhas. I'm a senior insider risk consultant. I have a background that is not technical at all, with international relations and crisis and security management. But I work for an organization that focuses on helping organizations increase their resilience to insider risk. So usually we assess organization on their maturities, and then we help them mitigate the risk by implementing recommendations.
Thank you. And my name is, as you also see, Diana Makienko. I'm working for Swift and I'm a BISO. And reason why I'm so passionate about insider risk is that some years ago to complete my executive master's in cybersecurity governance, I've done a thesis on battling malicious insiders, looking at that from academic as well as a practitioner point of view. And we want to share this knowledge from the more theoretical framework and combining with the practical experience.
Exactly. Best of both worlds.
That's exactly it.
To quickly run you through what we'll present to you today, we'll start with kind of leveling the playing field and telling you what we see as insider risk, what's the definition, what's important, and then we'll dive into a specific type of insider risk, which is intentional. Then we'll lead that with a bit of the academic background, with the critical pathway to insider risk. We can show you how an individual comes to that point where they might do such things. And then we'll round off with how to mitigate the risk, what are the pitfalls that organizations are falling in, what's the way forward, and to end it, we'll also open the floor for questions. So if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate. Yes. Let's start with insider risk. What is it? We consider insider risk as being a current or former employee, contractor, anybody that has basically access to your critical assets. That can be the network, the system, the data, the people. And that really impacts all industries, from pharma to high tech to logistics to government organizations. No one is exempt. And it's already been a trend the last few years that organizations are starting to recognize that risk. Now, 90% of organizations feel vulnerable to insider risk. I'm not sure what the other 10s are, but they feel very secure. It can also have a very impactful cost on our organization. The average cost right now is 14.8 million. And recently, the more you're aware of it, the more you also see that it becomes more frequent, because also you're looking for it, you can put a name to it. So 67% of organizations see more incidents. That can also be explained by some trends, and that's outside of the organization. The rise of competitions. So if you want to have the newest technology, maybe stealing it for a competing organization saves you millions in R&D. But there's also the value of data. If you want to make quick money, maybe selling some information for your employer can bring that to you. And also the rise of third-party networks. The more complicated and the more people have access, the more entryways you have. Now, the cost.
Yeah, the impact. So as Lucile was just mentioning, and zooming in a bit more into actual impacts that are often slightly underestimated. Well, obviously, financial damage. It's sort of the most obvious one, right? But in terms of financial damage, we're not talking only about the money that have been stolen. We're also talking about indirect costs. So the cost that you would need to spend to remediate and to recover your operations. Also potential payoffs to those who have been damaged by this particular cybercrime. There's also potential legal and litigation costs that can go really to hundreds of thousands, depends of course on the problem that happened. And penalties, not to forget. In the highly regulated world, and some industries are more highly regulated than others, sometimes penalties can also go into the 6, even 7 figures amounts. And other than that, your insurance costs, but hopefully you do have an insurance, next year insurance costs will probably also go much higher. So when talking about cost, we need to look into direct and indirect cost. I've mentioned the regulatory consequences. Some industries are regulated more than others, and most likely you're also familiar with, for example, NIS2 that has taken effect, I think like 2 weeks ago, the 17th. So the costs of not being compliant are quite significant. One aspect that has not been looked into quite often is the personnel well-being. If there is a attack on a company, and especially if it happens from within, people that are working for that company are quite impacted. Impacted in a psychological way, impacted in the way they communicate with one another, because especially if the perpetrator hasn't been caught or found, what will it do to your culture? Will people start looking at each other and thinking, was that you? That doesn't create a healthy environment, right? And last but definitely not least is your reputational damage. Sometimes the reputational damage can be slight, or even negligible. We all probably remember, I can't remember anymore the year, but I think it was 2 years ago, we were not able to buy cheese in Albert Heijn because their supplier was ransomware, and then for like the whole week you couldn't get cheese. No cheese in the Netherlands. I mean, that's a disaster, right? And would you stop going to Albert Heijn? Nah, probably not. It's around the corner, it's everywhere, you can't almost miss it. I mean, you definitely cannot miss it. But if your company's core business has a security embedded in it, what will happen if you have a security breach? Other than all those other impacts, you will probably lose your clients, and you lose most of them. And it even can happen that you will stop functioning altogether. I don't know how many of you remember the situation, I'll call it a situation for the lack of a better word right now, with the DG Notar in 2011. The organization doesn't exist anymore. So the impact can be obviously quite extensive and vary from very mild and just the financial damage to the full existence.
Yeah. And to, I think, rebound on that, what we see also practically with clients is that sometimes they need to have an incident to see what the cost is, either financially with the operation of the personal or the reputation, to actually say, okay, no, actually, this is a problem. We're going to put somewhere to look into. This is something we need to have a budget for and look in. Otherwise, it's just a worry for later. We'll focus on the external barriers. We trust our people. This would never happen in our organization. And sometimes they need to have kind of a reality check for it to change. Then we get to our focus for this session, the intentional insider. Why did we focus on this one specifically is, you'll see later with some numbers, but it's the one that can cause the most damage. And it's also the one sometimes you can stop, and there are some signs that you can look for. Before diving into this, we'll go into the dynamics. Yes. On the right of your screen, you have kind of like the typical threat actors that organizations recognize and always try to prevent. So competitors, nation states, organized crime, hackers. But they sometimes forget to protect from the inside. And the more barriers externally are being built up, the more also those threat actors think, yeah, why bother trying to get in the hard way if I can get in from inside? So then you get two types of insiders. Unintentional insiders, yeah, you click on that phishing link, now they have access. But also just making a mistake. You didn't think about what you put in the web. There's a funny case about that, I'll tell you about it. And you have also intentional insiders. Different ways you can basically be brought to that point where you say, okay, maybe I need money, or maybe I'm disgruntled against my organization, I want to hurt them. The example I was mentioning for unintentional is there was, I think, American soldiers that were training in the NATO bases in Europe, and to try to remember all the security protocols, they decided to create flashcards online with all of the security protocols, code words, everything. They just forgot to make it not public. So that if you typed the right words and the right keywords on internet, you could find where the missiles are kept, what's the code word if you're under attack, everything. They didn't mean to, but they put people in a lot of danger. Now, some statistics. Of course, 50% of incidents usually are unintentional. You just made a mistake. You didn't mean to. That's happened the most, and it has kind of a lesser cost. But when it comes to intentional cases, there are still 26% of registered cases that are intentional. And those ones tend to usually hurt the organization the most.
And this is why we're going to focus on it, because clearly, if you're within the organization, you literally know where the money are, right? Or the crown jewelers, as we say it. Let's just see how do you think and what do you think about insiders? And do you actually think that you can, providing the right circumstances, become an intentional insider? Now, I think all of us have smartphones nowadays, and even probably those who are very conscious about security and use old Nokia. I think there's still a flashlight there. And I stole this, by the way, from one conference, if those who were there, so I really like that idea. So if you could turn on the light, if you think that providing the right circumstances, you can become an intentional insider.
Okay, a few lights up.
Yeah. Don't be shy, it's not an exam. Okay, shall we wait a bit more? Because honestly, in all honesty, I was expecting much more lights. Okay, we have, and I hope I'm not insulting anyone, either overconfident people, or we need to do these presentations more often, I think. Right. Sorry? Providing exactly the wrong circumstances, providing given circumstances at any given time, you can become a malicious insider. Oh, no, sorry, not malicious, intentional insider. Okay, let's just then. And actually, that's a very good one, because many researchers and neuroscientists and organizational behavior scientists try to look for decades into how can we spot them? I mean, life would have been so much easier if they all look like Plague from Stieg Larsson's trilogy, right? Or, all those typical, the guy in the hoodie sitting somewhere in a corner looking kind of suspicious, right? So if all intentional insiders would have a specific way of looking, then it would be much easier. And I'm talking now actually about intentional insider. But unfortunately, that doesn't work this way. And sometimes it's just life that happens that pushes people to act one way or another. Yeah. And we just put here 7 Ds, because that's something, it might sound funny, but these are the things that are unfortunate parts of wrong choices that either you or your loved ones have made. I think for Dutch people here, you probably read or seen the movie Het Diner, where a situation is actually described where two couples having teenage children that actually committed a crime. And the reaction of the parents to their sons having committed a crime. What if someone would come and tell them, if you just give me X, Y, Z, and I'll make it disappear? I mean, this is a situation you wouldn't wish to your worst enemy, right? But things like making wrong choices, taking the wrong turn in your life sometimes happens. And that can make you an intentional insider, someone who would commit a crime without wanting to, but feeling that you don't have a choice.
Yeah, and actually I think you just mentioned doing something when you don't have a choice. This represents things that would happen to you personally that would maybe put you in a past where you feel like you have to do something. But there's also some cases that we see where people are coerced and even blackmailed. So if you're saying, okay, if you don't do this for me, if you don't give me the information or let me in, I'll hurt your family. There's not a lot of cases where people wouldn't do it. Now, the malicious.
So basically, why we make a clear distinction between unintentional, which is something, yes, okay, you've made a mistake. You didn't mean it. And then intentional, and then the next grade is malicious. It's all about intent. The first one with the 7 Ds, and of course there are more other things why you can become an intentional without wanting to, but having a feeling you don't have a choice, is you don't want to do it. You don't want to either harm the company or enrich yourself. In case of a malicious insider, we are talking about a gain, whether it's financial gain or emotional gain, or it's an intent wanting to commit that act. And under malicious insiders, there's also, we're missing here the 6th category, which is people that have been planted by the nation states. That's the whole totally different topic we are kind of deliberately not covering here, because otherwise we can have the whole day. So first, and the most common, and one of the oldest ones, is money.
Yes.
Why people commit crimes, cyber intrusions, selling data, stealing the copyright, intellectual copyright, etc., is for own enrichment.
Yeah, I was in an interview recently with an organization, and the person that we were interviewing was saying, in the end, everybody has a price. And that's a way, I guess, of looking at it. But yes, there's always going to be a limit to what people are willing to do and accept. Then,
anger. Well, we call it an anger. We've said it here as an anger, but in fact, it's disgruntlement. I think all of us had situations at work where you're so upset with your employer, and you really, at the moment of rage, you feel like, oh, I would have done something. But normally speaking, we get angry, we talk to our friends, we sleep on it, and we happily get up and go to work and do what we have to do, right? But of course, it's not always happens like this. Disgruntlement grows, and Lucile will talk a bit longer about that, and you want to harm your organization because you're so angry with them, because you're beyond the point where you can sleep on it, wake up, and happily go to work. There are obviously professional gains. And to my biggest surprise, when talking to lots of people, I realized that many people do not consider that a criminal behavior. When you leave in one company to move to another one, you print all the database of your customers. Well, of course you do, because these are your customers, right? That's the most normal thing what you do. Or maybe you can also take some documents because your new employer would really appreciate it. Well, this is professional gain. This is actually not legal, and this is being considered an act of malicious insider. Ideology. we live in a world which is not straightforward. I don't think we ever lived, maybe we had some decades that were more or less stable and where people thought about same things in the same way. But we have people that are very passionate about where we are today, what's happening in the world, and how their company is looking into that. But not only about politics or geopolitics, in general. Maybe you're working for the company that started doing business that you're not happy with. Maybe they started dealing in products that you find unethical. Or they got clients that you find appalling. And it's against your sense of rightfulness. And you do not appreciate it. And you want them to stop. So the ideology can also play a huge role. And last but not least, I mean, how this whole, I think lots of hackers community started with the script kiddies, somewhere in a garage or in a cellar or in the attic, just doing fun, trying to hack someone, trying to get into the computers of the government, I mean, or the tax authorities. I mean, that's fun, right? I mean, that fun remains fun. Kids try to hack something, but not just kids, adults also have fun trying to hack into places that are supposedly very secure. Also, some do just to show that they can. And that's part of the intention or intent should also not be underestimated.
Now, going back to the disgruntled mode and basically, how can people come to that point where they say, okay, I'm going to do an insider act, I'm going to harm my organization. There's this academic research that analyzes thousands of real-life cases and try to find kind of the pathway of where does it start and where does it end and what happens in the middle for people to come to that point. So this is what it looks like, and it starts with personal characteristics. This is just who you are, your character, your personality. It can also be influenced maybe by your upbringing, your social circle. Everybody has that. That doesn't mean you'll be an insider, but those are some of the characteristics that can maybe influence you or push you towards a direction or makes you more likely to be. Then you go down to the second steps, stressors. There's two types of stressors. You can have personal stressors. We already talked to some of them, financial issues, marital issues, illness in the family. And then there's also professional stressors. So you can be demoted or transferred to something you didn't like. Or you can also be bullied by your colleagues. This usually brings you to a third step, which for insider risk mitigation, we consider very key, which is concerning behavior. And why is it key? Is it because usually this is kind of like where it starts showing. This is also the time where organization can come in and help, or make things worse. We'll see about that. And why is it so important? It's the time where somebody is going to maybe act out, start working unusual hours, break policies, maybe complain to colleagues insistently about wanting to harm the company. And what we see that is actually 50% of insider actually complained and said to a colleague or friend that they wanted to harm the organization. And in 97% of cases, when you look back, there were concerning behaviors before an incident. So it's not like it comes out of nowhere. There's usually prior incidents that lead you to the final point. Now, the next step is the organization response. You either take this seriously, first of all, you see it, you recognize it, and then you, as the organization, decide, okay, how can we help? You take the right steps. If it's financial issue, maybe you can help with a plan. If it's unlikely transfer that you don't like, maybe they can find a solution for you. And this, if it's handled correctly, puts you back on the normal path. You're kind of, you're out. But if it's ignored, so if they don't see the sign, or if they don't care, or if on the opposite way they take too harsh decisions, like, okay, you make this mistake, you're fired, Then they push you even more down to the last step, which is the crime script, where you take the actions to commit the incident. So that can be downloading information, transferring it, also trying to access information you're not supposed to. Now, to exemplify a little bit on a case how somebody can go down this pathway, I will present to you this case. The American superconductor case, which is now called AMSC. AMSC was a leading turbine company, and they had a very big partnership with this organization, Sinovel, and they were also their key customer. But Sinovel was kind of tired of paying ASMC millions and millions for their technology hardware, and they decided it wouldn't be easier if we get somebody inside the organization to give it to us. And they find that person. So they convinced him with a 1.7 million contract that if they gave him the source code of this software, they would hire him, and that worked. That had devastating consequences for the organization. 80% reduction in business since they lost their biggest customer, 1 billion loss in market value, and 90% erosion of intrinsic value. That almost collapsed the organization. And back to the personal effects on people, 50% of their global workforce got laid off. Now, back to the critical pathway, I'll tell you a little bit more about the insider and how he came to that point. His name was, let me check, Kieran Korpacic, named GK for short, and also for me easier to remember. And he was the automation engineer for ASMC. And he was in contact constantly with Sinovel, and one of the stressor, you would say, is that he was very disgruntled with his employer. He really hated the work culture, and what made him really approachable for Sinovel is actually his personal characteristics, which was that he was a man with a very big ego, and it was described as having a heavy penchant for parties and women, and was looking for money. So they decided it was the perfect target. Now, in the concerning behaviors, all of his colleagues noticed that he was a little bit too friendly with that organization, and that he was also giving them information that he shouldn't be doing. What did the organization do? They did not notice that this was a problem. They also didn't block it when he downloaded the entire source code of the software. That was a problem, and that led to the crime script. He could just, from his computer, download the whole source code and send it by email to his new organization, and nobody said anything. So, yeah, this example is just to show you, exemplified how that's going to happen, but now we'll show you with Dhanayana the way of mitigating it. So, what should you do?
Well, actually, more of how should you be thinking about the mitigating actions and measures? Now, we're all, I assume, familiar with security controls. And there are various security controls directed by various regulations, directives, standards, etc. Click more, yeah. For the purpose of simplicity, as it is a presentation, let's divide them into the technical and hard controls and human soft controls. And this is, of course, not limited to, but we've selected the most common ones. And typically, every mature organization uses a set of them successfully. And typically, they work until they don't. And I don't want to tell that these are wrong measures. That's definitely not the message that we want to give. The message that we want to give, and the story that I'm just going to tell you in a second, is more about when implementing these measures. What are the other things you need to think of? So let's look into the hard controls and potential pitfalls. Okay. Identity access management, the holy grail of cybersecurity, right? Every organization has it to some extent. It has been put in place many years ago. It developed, it evolved, and of course various principles of the segregation of duty and the least privileged, and over the last years usage of biometrics, etc. This is all great and important and absolutely needed. Now, when logging in with your single sign-on, it's good to stand still and think, when was the last time all your applications and all your accesses have been reviewed? Because organizations grow, applications become legacy, you got some new ones. Some people are staying in the companies for years and years and years, accumulating their permissions and accesses, happily moving from one department to another, keeping the whole inheritance. How is it being managed? And to manage that successfully, you need to invest in it. It costs time, it costs money, and it costs lots of effort. And there should be process and policy in place and money given, obviously, to maintain IAM properly. But then there's another caveat to that. Majority of intrusions happened by people that had legitimate access. It's much harder for someone working for the company to try to get somewhere when that person doesn't supposed to be. Well, if you have already access, you can use it. And the last but not least, I often wonder, when all these duty segregations have been put in place, when these all 4 I's principles have been put in place, how well are they being applied? Or is it just a checkbox in your compliance paper? Often, people are overworked, and also they know each other. They work together for a long time. Hey, here's my password. Use it as a 4 I's principle. Or I just simply don't have enough people working in the weekend, so I have only one person, Jan, that has a password of and Jan and Piet. Sorry for using typical Dutch names, but that's... And last here is all the identity and access management that even efficiently has been put in place, has to be put in place also effectively for the business. Business needs to be able to do their work. Security is there to support business and not other way around. You should not be looking for your colleague who can type the other password because you want to get somewhere. And you know, funny story, which is actually not so funny. A couple of years ago, there was a issue in one of the hospitals with electricity, and it was noted. No, I'm sorry, different story. There was so doctors basically were complaining that introduction of GDPR and the usage of the encrypted data and safeguarding data has made their work very, very difficult. And why? Because at the moment the patient arrives, the data needs to be accessed by 2 people. And you need to choose whether to access the data of the person or have the person who's been brought by an ambulance wait for you to find the second person to type the password. So that's about identity and access management. Before I go, yes.
So, because I think something I see a lot with the organization we work with is actually the most sensitive times when it comes to access management and actually access revocation is when employees leave the organization. Why is it so important? Because usually there's a little bit of delay. It's not done right away. And this is actually the time where you're the most vulnerable as an organization. The employees leaving, either by themselves or because they're being laid off. So their loyalty to the organization is at the lowest. And what is being seen is that in most cases, for example, IT sabotage happens during the 60 days around the resignation or laying off. So having those processes in place applied, usually the manager has to approve for the person to say, okay, this is the dates of the person leaving. Those are processes that are super important to have in place.
Thanks. UBA, the user behavior analytics, it covers the whole range of monitoring, verifying, etc., and safeguard, security, cameras, etc. This is one of the, so monitoring as a part of it, one of the oldest controls that has been put in place decades ago. I think, our parents were working in the organizations that had some sort of monitoring. Either you have to stamp the card to get into your office so that they're monitoring that you're there. And initially it has been historically put in place to see that there are no crimes committed, there's no violence committed, and then no thefts occur. All important things. Nowadays, various sorts of monitoring are being used. There's a data that is going on the internal or external or outside on the network is being monitored. Your internet access / usage is being monitored. Sometimes the key logging is being monitored. But it can go even further where your eye movement is being monitored, or your eye movement to understand your brain waves is being monitored. Okay, that maybe goes a bit too far because we're in Europe and it's not allowed. Hence, when talking about UBA, you need to think your jurisprudence. You need to think about legality of whatever the actions you put in place. Other thing that also takes some consideration is how do people feel when they're monitored? Now, for example, with GDPR being now in place for many years, it's absolutely mandatory for every employer to advise employees on the monitoring actions they take, which is important, which is good. Transparency is important. But at the same time, it removes the social engagement from people in the sense that, well, if I know that there's a big brother watching me, why would I even bother to comment someone on his or her bad behavior, or to get concerned that someone is staying in the office till late and constantly spends time at the printer all of a sudden? And on the other hand, it also creates some anxiety. And there are evidences that people that work for heavily monitored organizations, they often, some people, of course, not all, they often feel stressed. And the level of creativity diminishes. And as I said, it's not all about technology, because people interact with each other, and who is the better placed than a human person spotting that something is odd? You haven't been acting like this all the time I've known you, so what's going on? And knowing that we are being monitored, you kind of remove that bit. But even with monitoring, you need to have a plan. What if you have sort of caught someone on strange behavior or behavior out of pattern? What is your plan? What you're gonna do? Okay, you're gonna talk to this person. Hey, how's it going? Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. Why are you here in the evening? Oh yeah, my neighbors are having reconstructions till 10 o'clock in the evening. I can't work there. Okay, it's fine. So you need to have a plan.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what we see also in some organization. If they recognize, for example, insider risk or the potential of it as a problem, they might just say, okay, let's invest in a tool, let's monitor as many logs as we can based on GPRs, and then we'll see what happens. And then they don't really take the time to say, okay, what are we looking to stop? What are the use cases that we can see, the sequential of events that would lead to insider risk? And what would you do, as Diana mentioned, once you get an alert? What is the process afterwards? And what usually ends up happening is that the analysts that are taking care of the tool just get overwhelmed with the amount of alerts. And half of them are false positive because it's not been configured correctly. So then they're in a situation that they have a very expensive tool that is actually bringing them more work and less actually visibility and answers.
No benefits.
Well,
I mean, or less a benefit than
yes,
the return on investment is in negative figures.
Yes, we're not saying don't use any tool. There's definitely some good things about using it and using it the right way, but there needs to be preparation and works done in advance.
Then I want to stand still by soft controls. And again, these are not, there are more, and we are limiting it to just the 4 groups of it. And again, here not to say that they do not work. They're important ones, but there are considerations that needs to be taken into account. Employee screening and personality test. And then here we're talking about pre-employment and in employment. Several years ago, I was talking to a friend, and she was telling me like, oh, our organization, the security in our organization is just so great. We do such an extensive screening. And I was like, okay, and? No, but we know who we are selecting, so this is really, really very secure. At the end, we agreed to disagree, and a couple of years later, a very securely chosen person has stolen lots of data and has been blackmailing them for that. I did not come back, and I didn't tell her I told you so, but okay. It was tempting. In pre-employment screening, I think, that's an important thing to do. It's important to realize or to understand if the person in front of you is who he or she says they are, right? That the history of education and employment is correct. That skills that are mentioned on the CV are absolutely those that the person has. And it's also important to understand if the person, or to spot and to recognize if person has lied about one thing, maybe this is not the right person for our organization because we don't accept this. At the same time, you also look into the character of this person by doing the personality test. And in some of the companies, and I think it's been also quite popular, the IQ tests have been conducted before you've been employed. How many of you had those personality questionnaire and the IQ test done, and then you thought like, is that even me? Do I even know that person? Well, I had. I turned out to be total moron who's antisocial. Thank you. And why does it happen? Well, for a few reasons. Reason one, first of all, on the personality tests, we tend to score a fake good. Because we really want the job. Otherwise, why are you applying, right? You want to have this job, or you want to have this position in your company. So you want to answer the questions the best way possible that in your mind matches the job description. You do that either consciously or unconsciously, or subconsciously, but you do that. And therefore, the results most likely do not match you. And in the academic world or in the research, it's called faking good. The other thing is the IQ tests. Why sometimes people scoring low, and why after practicing weeks and weeks and weeks you can improve your score. Our brains are wired to function in the context. Doing all this, figure out whether the dot is here this way or that way. It's out of context. That's something that your brain, under normal circumstances, do not recognize as something within your life. And hence, without lots of practicing, you do not score to the right way. To the correct figure of your intelligence. And why do you score after practicing? Is because you train your brain to recognize that pattern and see it as a context. Then, of course, your screening. What does your screening say? In majority of the companies, and I'm not talking about intelligence, you do either light screening or medium screening. And what does it say? You typically have your credit check, you have your police check, and that's basically it, right?
Depending on the country.
Depending on the, but if we take Europe or the Netherlands, it's pretty light. If you have a clean paper from the police, what does it say to you? Basically, it just says what it says. You haven't committed a crime for which you have been caught in your country or in the country of your jurisdiction. That's it. You might have been a serial killer somewhere in the country the Netherlands in this example doesn't have any relationship with, but you wouldn't know that. And same is for your credit check. What does it say? Yeah, okay, you haven't made debts here that are official. As Lucile was explaining, the critical path, your character and some traits, some personal traits might, do play a role. So you might have history of psychotic episodes while being angry. Is that something that you can get being an employer? Most likely not, because by according to the GDPR, this is sensitive data that you do not ask, you do not get. And so, taking all this into account, you need to, when you do pre-employment screening, you need to realize that the set of information that you have and what does it mean. And in employment screening is an element that is also very important, because as we were talking about the 7 Ds, life can happen. I mean, you can create debts, you accumulate debts, you can become an alcoholic, but what if you're a functional alcoholic? Nobody knows. I mean, will it show up on your in-employment screening? No. It will not probably show up in any other screening, most of the screenings then. And what if something comes up in your record which is not of your liking as an employer? What are you going to do? And here I'm coming again to, you need to have a plan. Because there are about 150 unconscious biases in this world. And as people working for the same company, they most likely have a bit similar view to the world or to the company or to the way the things are done. And typically they would have an affirmation, there will be affirmative biases. Because, well, you're like me, I'm like you, so we're okay, you've done something, how's this done? Okay, like, that's fine. So if you do not have a clear plan, what do you do if something is checked red or red flagged? Then it makes no sense. Then, contracts and NDAs, they're being put in place. And I think personally, it's an important thing that if you work for a company where you need to keep your data, or the information you're dealing with secure and confidential, you need to sign NDA. The reliance on this NDA might be a bit too big, because NDA is mainly a moral deterrence. Unless, of course, someone leaves the company and it's been leaked that that person has done that, then it's your legal instrument. But otherwise, if person has not been caught, what you gonna do?
Yeah, and sometimes I think people forget that they have NDAs, or they don't really understand what it covers, what they're allowed and not allowed, for example, to take with them, what is personal information, what is organization or information. So what we usually see is that, yeah, they just leave their organization. They don't even remind themselves that they have an NDA. They're just like, oh, it's fine. I'll go to my new organization with all the data I have, and I'm not even sure that's a bad thing, because I made those slides, or I made this software, so it's mine.
And even more to that, there are some NDAs where your company gives it to you together with your contract, but you don't even sign it. So even if you're caught at the end using the data from your previous employer, then this is not a legal instrument because you haven't signed it. Confidential reporting, again, something I really think is very, very important. The caveat to that is that to introduce confidential reporting in your country, you need to be very strong on duty of care. The mentality of the company should be welcoming to come up with whatever problem you have personally or someone else has. And people would do that only in case they know for sure that if you tell your HR, security officer, whomever is designated to be your person of contact, that the person you are talking about is not getting fired or is not getting into problems. Other thing is, and this is, we've talked recently, is no one likes to snitch. And that's what you said, Lex.
Yeah.
Snitches
get stitches.
Yes. So we know from the childhood that if I snitch on someone, I might get in trouble. So I'd rather not. On top of it, people feel, well, it's life. I mean, someone goes about his or her business. I mean, why should I interfere? Maybe the person is, I don't know, having personal issues, and it's not my business to ask. Teleworking introduced a bigger concern because we work from home, and there is no way I'm trying to advocate not working from home, but working from home a lot of time removes the social dynamic of the company. How would you know that something is odd? You have seen your colleague 5 times. You wouldn't. You don't know what's normal. Hence, you cannot see what is not okay. And on top of it, you don't have that relationship to come and ask what's going on. I mean, then you're intruding in a person's life. Why would you do that? And here, in addition to that, the unconscious biases play a role because, hey, you're like me, we are fine. Plus, hierarchy plays the role. I just for fun ask a few people I know, what would you do if your colleague is staying late every single evening, look very, very grumpy, and constantly printing something? And then apparently, it goes from, if it is a colleague I know, I'll ask, are you okay? If it is person I don't know, I might probably just leave it there. And if it is the big boss, well, it's none of my business. And last but definitely not least, security awareness and training. Another holy grail of soft controls then. Mandated by ISO 27001/2, NIS 2, and plenty of other directives and regulations. Every mature company should have it because it is important for people to have the security hygiene imprinted into them, because they need to know not to click on the phishing emails. They need to know how to recognize the phishing emails. They need to know that they should not be sitting in a cafe with their laptop, typing some kind of confidential information while people are standing just at the window of the same cafe looking at his screen. Probably all of you have seen this, like in a nice sunny day, I mean, working in a cafe. But does the awareness and training solves the problem of a malicious insider? Most likely not, because why would I care about security hygiene if my goal is to harm my company? I mean, I literally couldn't care less. Then to have a good security and awareness and training, you need to invest. And not just invest money, but invest time and invest thoughts. It has to be a good thought-through process. You need to understand that one size does not fit all. And you need to constantly evolve. I think all of us had exams that you study for, you do it tomorrow, you get your passing grade, and you totally forgot. You don't remember a single word what it was, and you're happy about that. So majority of security awareness and training are those kind of exams. I just done my 5 slides, I do the quiz, I passed. Okay, thank God. Next year again. And I don't want to see that anymore in my life. It should not be like this. People learn by experiencing, and adults learn by playing. And I think there is a session, or there was a session, or will be a session about gamification, but it should be interesting for you to make it integral. Other concern that I will often see is, again, what are we measuring? 90% of all our employees have completed security training within 1 month. Super, we're super compliant. Okay, and what? Yeah, 90% completed, and then? Does that mean that these 90% people are going to follow the security rules and practices and apply that in real life? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. What are we measuring? So if you have your security awareness and training in order to be compliant, that's fine. But if you really want to change the behavior, you need to think what will change the behavior. Lots of time, the team or department who is dealing with these trainings is not quite clear. Should it be HR? But then where the priorities? Priorities can be to have more business trainings, because you need people to actually do the work. Hence, money will not be allocated for the security one. Is it IT? Well, I need people to be trained on Agile, right? I mean, security, it comes on itself. I don't have that much money for that. So the priorities should be well balanced, and the responsibilities as well. And last but not least, the trainings needs to be proven by time. Whatever was hot yesterday, it's not going to be hot tomorrow. Social engineering, AI is taking over a lot of threats. And are we being trained on that? Do I know how to spot the difference between deep fake? Am I being trained on that? Are you? So that's why I said the security awareness and training, it's not just money and budget. It's a thought through process, and it has to be continuous and not a one-off exercise.
Yes. So now that we've presented you some of the pitfalls, we'll try to also round off, okay, what do we think then are the good elements that you need to have? And I think Diana already mentioned, the goal is not to say that the things we mentioned before, you should not have them, you should. But they're not the only solution. They're not a silver bullet. You need a bit of everything to make it work. And that's why we prone a kind of a holistic approach. And there's a few things that you would need to really mitigate the risk. The first one is governance. Who is going to take care of this problem? Who is owning it? Is it HR? Is it security? Yeah, if it's seen as a security issue, people are just going to say, yeah, they're just another training, they want to monitor everything we do. So that's why a lot of organizations actually choose to share the ownership, to also show, okay, this program is also to help you. It's to help employees. If you're struggling, you can come forward and we'll help.
And it should be directed from or coming from the top. Because if your top leadership is not interested to invest in your cybersecurity, you can keep on getting new VPN boxes or increase your perimeter security. Your employees, your insiders will still eventually struck. And the question is not even yesterday the question was, not if, by when. Today, it's not if or it's not when, it's how often.
Other elements, I'll quickly run through them. I know we're running out of time. Yeah. You can protect everything and everyone all the time. So the advice is start small. Start with what are your crown jewels, what are your critical assets, who are your critical people, and start there. Make sure they're trained, they know what access they should have, and make sure the security measures around those are in place. Then a narrative. You can just start a program and assume people are going to understand what is the problem. Insider risk can have quite a negative feel to it. So it's like, okay, the organization doesn't trust us. They see us as threats, but we're actually working our asses off for them. So why this program? So it's super important for it to be framed in the way that this is not an attack on people. This is not, we don't trust people. It's, we trust, but we need to verify. And we are there for you to also, help.
To protect
employees.
you.
Protect employees.
Yeah.
Behavioral change, that links to the point Diana was saying about training. Training just to train, just for compliance, is only get you so far. What is really effective if you really narrow down, okay, what are the behaviors that we're seeing in our organization that are not working? What do we need to change? And then target those with training to make sure they understand what the problem is. What's the consequences of them not wearing the badges, not doing the phishing exercises, and what are the risks for them and for the organization. And we were talking earlier about tools. Yeah. tools are great. They're not often the all and be all. You need a mix. You need some, of course, monitoring to see what's happening in your organization. Make sure maybe you can block things that are being sent out of your organization that should not. But you also need the human element. You need to be able to feel comfortable to report, I'm seeing some suspicious behaviors. I'm worried about my colleague. What can we do?
And humans to respond to the alerts that are generated by the tools and respond in proper way, in the way they trained humans that know how to respond, what to look for, and what to do if person is in need. And I think maybe I'll cover the last, because speaking of people being in need, when I was doing my research, I was focusing mainly on the controls. And funny enough, every single person I've interviewed, towards the end of the interview said, but can I just add something? There is one thing which is not a control, and it's how the organization treats people. How is it? And I think the word shit has been used a few times, so I'm going to say it. So if you shit on your family, that typically people don't do this. So your organization needs to give you a feeling of loyalty, of a family, people that care about you, that you can come to someone, whether it's HR, whether it's a person of trust, and say, hey, I've run into troubles. My bill and the gas bill is quadrupled and I can't pay it. What can you help me? And of course, not all organizations are in the position to give away loans with zero interest rate, but the possibility should be there, and people should feel a part of the organization and included and personally interested in making the organizations thrive.
Yes, so this concludes our presentation. I know it is time for lunch, so I get it if you guys want to go.
And we've run out.
Questions, we can answer some of them.
Yeah. And we will be around, so if any of you is interested.
Yes.
But if there's someone with... Oh, yes, of course, sorry. Sorry. Excuse me. So we can do one question if there's somebody who really wants to ask the question. Yes. Oh, here, yeah.
Yes, I'm just very curious. What personality traits are we talking about? Like you talked about earlier, that there's a higher risk. You didn't mention.
Yeah. So just to be clear, it's not because you have this traits that you'll be an insider, but for example, having a very big ego, then it's easier maybe to be appealing to that. Or if you're being in a situation that you're not super comfortable socially, and then you get bullied by your colleagues, that also makes you... Yeah. So it really is a range, and also you could consider having a history of violation in your past, so not following the rules could be then kind of a pre-indicator that you're not super loose with black and white, and that you're willing to bend the rules. Those types.
But also people that are extremely passionate about most of the things. People that typically either black or white, in my way or the highway, it would be easier. And there were plenty of situations in the history that the ideology played a huge role there, because they became so appalled or disgusted almost by the organization, so they had to do something, and they've committed an insider crime. By the way, lots of spies or lots of the ex-KGB agents that couldn't stomach it anymore. They defaulted and they went to the US, for example.
So much passion. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think this is a very interesting topic. We're also starting with behavioral pen testing right now, because pen testing itself is not enough anymore. And I think what you just told me just gave me more ideas for what we can do for this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.